Hello, everybody. We are so happy that you have joined us today. We are ecstatic that we are starting this conversation about all things about politics. Thank you. I am the president of the Austin Alumni Chapter here in Austin, Texas, Gamma Eta Lambda Chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. As you all are very aware, Governor Greg Abbott signed a whole lot of stuff. A whole lot of stuff. And now what? What should we do? What should we come from? What should we gather from this? And more importantly, what should we be prepared as negatives as well as positives of these laws? How can we make sure that those laws don't impact us in the greatest and negative way? Today, we're actually going to be discussing this topic right here out of Austin, Texas. We have our social actions chair, Brother Jesuorobo Enobakhare. He's the social actions chair for Texas Council of Alpha Chapters. We have Commissioner Jeff Travillion, all brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and also Brother Eric McDaniel. He is with University of Texas. So without further ado, I'm gonna quit talking and I'm gonna let Brother Enobakhare come in and bring this thing to light. Brother Enobakhare, it is all yours. Y'all have a great conversation, and thank you all, everybody, for joining us.
Uh, Good evening, brother. First, I just want to thank you, Brother Harrison. I want to thank you for allowing me to join you in the Austin Alphas, Gamma Eta Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha. It is a privilege to be with you esteemed brothers tonight. And I think, we can just jump in. I'll just give a brief introduction to myself. My name is Jesuorobo Enobakhare Jr. I'm a Spring 91 initiative, Alpha Phi Alpha at Tulane University, and I'm currently a member of the Alpha Sigma Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha. I also chair Police Oversight Board in the city of Dallas. I'm also a former member of the Texas Democratic Party Executive Committee. But enough about me. Let's go ahead and get started. We have some brothers on this panel that are chomping at the bit and ready to go. Let's go ahead and dive in. We want to talk about these bills that Greg Abbott signed. It's the 666, which that's the number of laws that Greg Abbott signed into law, number of bills that Greg Abbott signed into law September 1st. We're not going to go over the full 666 bills. We're going to talk about a few that really need to draw our attention. But we will go around the room. Brothers, introduce yourselves before we get started.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Travillion. I'm Travis County Commissioner of Precinct 1. I've been a member of Alpha Phi Alpha since the spring of 1982, Delta Phi Chapter, Jackson State, Jackson, Mississippi. I have served the community. This is my second term, started in January. Before that, I worked 30 years in state and local government for the city of Austin, for the state of Texas, and I've spent the last 25 years on the executive committee of the state NAACP. So glad to join you this evening and talk about what's been going on this legislative session.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric McDaniel. I am an associate professor in the Department of Government at the University of Texas. I'm also the co-director of the Politics of Race and Ethnicity Lab at the University of Texas. I've been at the University of Texas since 2003. I am a fall 2010 initiate of the Gamma Eta Lambda chapter, and I'm also the host of Digging into the Culture, a weekly radio show on KZI that has an uncompromising look into the Black culture. And the show airs at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays on KZI, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, well, brothers, let's jump in. I'm going to start with some low-hanging fruit. Brother Travillion.
Yes.
Let's talk about permitless carry.
Well, we know that the state has allowed permitless carry, and I think that it creates a range of problems. Number one, we need to make sure that responsible people who understand how to use guns have the opportunity to do so. We also understand that in a state like Texas, people are looking to stand their ground. And what that usually means is they fear someone who's around them and oftentimes without cause pull guns. It is irresponsible in the environment that we are in to pass that type of legislation. It is reasonable to ask that a person have a nonviolent record. It is reasonable to understand the mental capacity and problems of someone. But what Abbott has done is absolutely irresponsible, and it was really done for pure partisan politics. It's a cultural issue that is designed to organize a lot of Trumpites. It's not designed to make this culture or this state any safer. It will not make anyone safer. It will make it more dangerous.
Brother McDaniel, what are your thoughts on permitless carry?
I echo what Brother Travillion just stated. This is being done mainly because Governor Abbott is trying to position himself as a run for president, but it's also part of this larger aspect we're seeing going on in Texas and many other states of what's been referred to as reactionary conservatism. There's a book by Christopher Parker and Matt Barretto titled Change They Can't Believe In. And within this, they talk about these reactionary conservatives who were unlike traditional conservatives. Traditional conservatives are slow to change. These reactionary conservatives are all about turning the clock back. And if you think about things like Make America Great Again, this is at the heart of this. They were shocked seeing a black man in the White House. They've been shocked by the protest. So you see other states such as Missouri begin to loosen its gun laws in response to the protest in Ferguson. And this has not helped the state of Missouri. What you've seen in the state of Missouri with their loosening of gun laws is an actual increase in the number of white male suicides. This is not making the society even safer. There's a book titled Dying of Whiteness, which goes into detail about this. You're going to learn more about this. But this is not a public safety policy at all. This is politics.
Thank you, brother. All right, Brother McDaniel, we're going to come back to you. Let's talk about the medical marijuana expansion. We know that right now, people with any form of cancer or suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, they now have access to low THC cannabis for medical purposes. This is the expansion of the Texas Compassionate Use Program, which has allowed people with conditions such as epilepsy and autism to access medical marijuana. What are your thoughts on this expansion? Is it far enough?
The big thing with marijuana is that until the federal government moves away from being a type 1 drug, it's always going to be problematic. That we're seeing in many states where they have done this, you can only deal in cash, and this has made it extremely difficult for these companies to become legitimate and they spend a lot of time on security. Still being considered a Schedule 1 drug does harm the use of it. Now, seeing this as a compassionate, providing some type of treatment to individuals is seen as good, but it is probably part of a slow process of the state of Texas legalizing marijuana. And again, the idea of legalizing marijuana as well as making open carry sounds like a bad combination, but we'll see what happens.
Brother Travillion, what are your thoughts on the expansion of compassionate use for marijuana?
Well, the Republican Party, particularly with Jeff Sessions, has always described marijuana as a gateway drug, basically saying that you start here and you go to harder drugs. I'm not aware of the evidence that they've put in place to support that argument. I think that what we see is a huge opioid crisis that has been created basically through the misuse of pharmaceuticals. I think that since you have been able to demonstrate that people with epilepsy have been helped by this problem, as you look at the fact that you don't have to use harder opioids in order to address pain management, I think that we will probably move more and more towards a compassionate use. You look at the number of states that are making those options available. You know, you look at Colorado, you look at California, you look at Oregon. There's even legislation now under consideration in Mississippi. And I think, as we see the way that this opioid crisis is being handled in the courts, I think it creates an opportunity to say there are alternatives, there are less harmful alternatives, and we will probably begin to move more in that direction, I predict.
Thank you, brothers. All right, I'm about to, I've been throwing some softballs now. I'm about to hit you with a big one now. Brother Travillion, let's talk about HB 2497, which establishes an 1836 project committee, which we all know that's that is kind of pandering to a certain subset of society that does not want to acknowledge the horror and also the truthfulness of the history of slavery in this country. So why don't you jump in and talk about this project here?
Well, there are a number of ways to look at this. It seems that they are trying to make this a cultural issue as well. When you look at the lieutenant governor speak to it, he says, well, they're trying to sell us as racists. So when you ask yourself the question, who was responsible for the Red Summer of 1919? What happened in Tulsa in 1921? How many sundown towns did you have in Texas? Why was the city of Austin segregated by government ordinance in 1928? And then why were those communities redlined after they were segregated? Now, at the end of the day, you can argue until you're blue in the face that you aren't a racist. But when the actions that you take have a racist outcome, and arguably even a racist intent, it is difficult to make the argument, well, we did it, but we shouldn't talk about it. At the end of the day, these guys have used redistricting, have used the state constitution, have used all of the resources and power of government to guide the economy, to exclude some from the economy. Texas came into the union owning its public lands, and when it didn't have any money. So if you provided a service for Texas, if you surveyed the railroad areas, for example, you would get 620 acres of land unless you were Black or an Indian. You could do the work, but you couldn't get paid for the work. At the end of the day, we need to understand the actual history that happened. If somebody is responsible for something and someone took advantage of someone, they should own their behavior and repair it. If they want to be known as trusting, they should be trustworthy. If they want to be known as honorable, they should live with honor. When they act in the manner in which they do, they should be known as they are, racist through and through.
Now, Brother Travillion, you brought up some good points on especially some pieces of history that I didn't know about. Brother McDaniel, I know you jumping at the bit to jump in on this piece since we're talking about education here. What are your thoughts on this?
It's amazing how a state that's known for saying, remember the Alamo, wants to tell us to forget everything else. The Texas Letter of Secession, when it joined the Confederacy, openly states that this was about white supremacy, about maintaining white supremacy.
Yes.
What they're basically saying is, we want to lie about who we are so you'll think we're better. We want to be a living, talking, walking lie. This is what all this is about. What this is about is a failure to recognize their past mistakes and a want to continue it. This is flat out cowardice. Because instead of saying, you know what, we did wrong, let's not do that again. Let's teach each other about how we did wrong. Let's not talk about it at all. That they want to talk about all these horrible things that they want to remember happening in Texas, but they want to talk about the horrible things that they did. This right here is an example of them trying to play the role of the victim when they've been the victimizer. This is a attempt we've seen happen over and over again. This happened after the Civil War, when you see the Nadir come in and they talk about, try to romanticize the South. These are the same people who like going and having weddings on plantations. They're romanticizing something that was completely evil. And they want to act as if they're innocent. And this sense of innocence makes them feel like they are God's chosen people. Because you can't be God's chosen people and also be evil. But what they did is evil. And they want to feel better when they go to sleep at night. And so they decide, let's just lie to ourselves instead of confront the truth.
So let me ask you this question. How does this impact Black children with them being taught in school this almost Texas patriotism indoctrination? How does this impact Black children?
Well, in many ways, it teaches you to think you've done something wrong. If all the heroes from Texas are white men, and the only story you get is like, well, you were slaves, then we set you free. Everything becomes about, well, the things that white men did for us. And this is dangerous because what you're trying to set forth is a precedent that there's something wrong with not being white, that white is perfection. And in doing so, you are stigmatizing these children. And so now it's on the job of us, it is the job of their parents to basically sell them. No, there's a much broader story here. There are many things that we need to confront in Texas history, and that if we keep lying and they keep lying to you, you can easily see a rejection of the system and then want to basically drop out because they know they're being lied to. This can have very harmful effects. And so they're talking about we need to get rid of certain books because making white kids feel self-conscious. It's funny that when white kids felt self-conscious and felt bad, we need to act. But when you were doing this to Black kids for 150 years, it was like, oh, well, they'll get over or they deserve it. So it's clearly a sign of a failure, or really it's a sign of white supremacy in action and an attempt to protect white supremacy at all costs.
You know, when we mentor kids and when we talk to kids, when we work with 100 Black men, for example, our focus is what they see is what they will be, and what we try to do is put strong Black men in leadership and strong Black men who are managing their families and working in their communities and solving problems in front of them so that they can see that. What we have to remind them of and what we have to tell them of is our parents' generation. We talk about what the greatest generation was. I think my dad was born in 1930. My mom was born in 1933. My father was made at Delta Kappa. He's a frat, Delta Kappa, 1951. And the folks that were his brothers, many of them became teachers and coaches because those were the only professional jobs available to them. But they took those jobs and they made commitments to each other's children. They made sure that every kid in their circle not only was taught well, but excelled, given opportunities to lead, given books to read. They made sure that they protected us from the hate around us, and they prepared us for the leadership positions that we find ourselves in today. This is no mistake. When I never picked a teacher until I got to graduate school because my parents knew all my teachers. They grew up in a community of them, and they were committed to one another. We have to make sure that our children understand our history. We have to make sure that our children understand our sacrifice, and they understand that hard work pays off, even in a system that is upside down because of racism.
Great answers, brothers. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit because, Brother Travillion, you made a comment about something, and I think this is the perfect segue. And let's talk about redistricting. They've come up with the maps, and everybody by now has seen the maps, and they're starting some additional testimony in regards to the maps. Let's talk about a couple of things here. So we know that Texas population growth was such that Texas received 2 additional congressional seats.
Correct.
As a result of our census numbers. And
Correct.
That growth is fueled by Black and brown power, meaning by the growth of our Black and brown communities. But yet when we look at the maps, it looks as though, well, it doesn't look as though, it's clear as day that you're seeing a reduction of Black voting power because of the fact that they are taking away districts that would traditionally be for Black people. They've also taken away voting power for Hispanics as well, in the fact that they're taking away districts that they would have majority voting power, but yet they've also been able to increase the number of white majority districts, even though if you look at all of the major cities, you look at Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, you'll see that there's almost double-digit growth of Black and brown people and almost double-digit reduction of white people. Let's talk about what these districts, what these districts the districts that have been drawn out. What is the end goal here for those drawing those maps?
So you really have to look at this in the context of what has happened during the last 3 redistricting cycles. Mm-hmm. And what we saw the Republican Party do was begin to first try to reach out to the civil rights community and ask the civil rights community to work with it. The first thing that they tried to do was remove all white Democrats and replace them with Republicans. And when you look all across the South, that was a strategy. Many of the states that you look at, when you look in your congressional districts, most of your folks will be minority rather than white. They push them first. Then 10 years ago, what we saw was that we had 4 million person growth during that period too. And we knew that almost 75% of that growth was Hispanic, almost 20% of that growth was African American. But we saw no seats drawn. Mark Vesey won the seat out of the Fort Worth area, but it was actually designed for the Latinx community, not the African American community. But Martin Frost had a very influential role in making sure that Vesey won. There should have been at least 2 Latinx seats drawn and an African American seat as well. So fast forward 10 years in the future, and now we have a very similar growth with 4 million again, and the majority of them being Latinx, but the next area growing being African American, people moving back into the South because it's less expensive to live in rather than the North, and are having strong institutions like historically Black colleges here. Houston with a 24% African American population, Dallas around the 20% area. 1 out of 4 votes come out of Houston, 1 out of 5 votes come out of Dallas. What we saw, and one of my best friends represented Al Green, another frat, Sheila Jackson Lee, and Eddie Bernice Johnson. 10 years ago, their houses were drawn out of their districts. I testified in the lawsuit in San Antonio, and in the record, you had senators and state reps putting their country clubs and their grandchildren's schools into their districts while putting our houses out of our own districts. It was so bad that even the Republican-led court in San Antonio said, you guys got to give me something to work with. This is terrible. And it's all written into the record. It was the Supreme Court that said, well, this is political. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with politics. Well, politics and race are inextricable in this country. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be important for us to make sure that we understand that as we talk about redistricting, the question is, can the person that is sent to Washington or the person that is sent to Austin represent your interests? We have districts that run from Dallas all the way to San Antonio. How can you solve problems in a community where you've never talked to more than 10% of your district? You don't know any grandmothers. You've never been to a football game. You don't know the churches that exist there. How can you solve problems for people that you don't interact with? We have to also remember that this process was started by DeLay, who was run out of office because he separated legal political money with corporate money, which was illegal to use for a political purpose. Use that money to turn the state house. And now that the state house is turned, the maps that you see are unconscionable.
Now, one thing, and Brother McDaniel, I'm gonna let you jump in here. One thing I read was that every map that's been drawn for Texas since the 60s, since the establishment of the Voting Rights Act, every map drawn has been shown to be unconstitutional, has been shown to be discriminatory, and they've been forced to redraw it by courts. Every one since the 60s. Brother McDaniel, can you talk a little bit about this trend here with the maps of the congressional districts and the state legislative districts, and how these maps almost seem to be punitive to people of color?
Well, this is a classic technique called stacking and cracking, where you basically put all the people of color into one area. And while they can make up their own district, what you do is you split them up into a bunch of different districts in order to dilute their vote. So this is classic vote dilution. When 95% of the state growth is from people of color and the number of white districts increase, that's clearly vote dilution. This is being built along racial lines. And the reason they can get away with this is because in 2013, the Supreme Court argued that the calculation used for Section 5 of the 65 Voting Rights Act, Section 5 put in pre-clearance in place, which meant any state that had a history of, state or county, which had a history of racial discrimination when it came to voting, had to get clearance from the Justice Department before it could do anything. It had to get that first. Once the court said the calculation used for which states and counties are selected is out of date and Congress needs to update it, well, pre-clearance is no longer in use. And this is why they're trying to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act pushed through, because this will put pre-clearance back in place. And the lack of pre-clearance means they can go out and go hog wild. And that's what they have done. The actions they're taking part in are clearly out of fear. It's as I mentioned earlier about reactionary conservatives. They see that the state will no longer be under their control. And so they're doing everything they can to prevent that. They are taking part in anti-democratic policies under the guise of protecting democracy. They are being anti-democratic. They're being authoritarian. They are undercutting these things. And to be truthful, as long as it benefits the Republican Party at the national level, don't expect them to do anything. This is how Jim Crow was able to survive. That, hey, you bring us the votes, we don't care what you do at the local level. Now, while we do have a Democrat in office now, the fact that it's been so difficult just to get the John Lewis Act through raises a lot of problems we need to be concerned about when looking at what is going on in Congress, because Congress's failure is why we're in this situation. Because Congress cannot get the things done that need to get done, and they want to sit there and quibble, and they basically, a lot of Democrats want to kowtow to white supremacy, that the John Lewis Act has not been passed. So Right now, what we need is to keep working, keep mobilizing, and really, in some of these districts that are drawn, we've got to go out, we've got to vote, and we've got to find a way to at least control one of the chambers, and also control who the lieutenant governor is, because the lieutenant governor is in charge of the Senate, and if we can control who the lieutenant governor is, we can control a lot of the bills that come through.
So this just reads like a Public Enemy album, Fear of a Black Planet.
Yes, very much so.
So and you mentioned one thing. I don't know if the audience actually knows this, but the lieutenant governor actually is the most powerful elected official in the state of Texas. Not the governor, the lieutenant governor. The governor, if we notice that the governor, we really haven't seen the governor exercise power much until we've had this pandemic. This is the first time we've really seen a governor in recent times really flex his muscle and really impact lives with the power of the office. And it's almost been, to me, almost a study of civics as I've watched him perform his duties in regards to supposedly protecting the public safety. One thing I do want to ask both of you, for those that are listening now, what can they do to help with this? What can they do to help get the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act across the finish line? What can they do right now?
They need to reach out to their congressperson and to the senator. They need to basically flood them with calls over and over again to get this through. And what you really need to do is mobilize those Democrats that are sitting on the fence. They need to hear from their constituents. So the people in West Virginia need to start calling. They need to take action, and we need to let them know that, no, this needs to be done now. The more they get this, the more likely you're going to see action. But it's really on us. And the sad thing about it is, a lot of people think once you get somebody elected, okay, we're done. No, getting the person elected is the easy part. The hard part is about getting the policy through. And this is something I hope we learned when Obama was elected. Getting Obama elected was the easy part, but getting his agenda through is the hard part. So this is where you need to keep showing up to the polls. You need to keep voting. You need to keep the pressure on. Even if your elected official is a Republican, you need to let that person know, I want this done. It needs to be in their ear. It needs to be ringing in their ear. They can't go to sleep without thinking about this. This needs to be in their dreams. And so we have to keep putting the pressure on them in order to get this done. They're not going to do anything out of the kindness of their hearts. They're only going to do it if you put the pressure on them to do it.
So I think there are a couple of things. You don't have a problem passing the John Lewis bill out of the House side. Pelosi has done a good job of keeping the Democrats together there. The difficulty that you have is a Senate side, because you've got an even split, and you've got Manchin who does not want to risk much as he exists within a Republican state. And then you've got the senator from Arizona who is really thinking about, can I support this and still win again? At the end of the day, you're right. We have to flood the email boxes. We have to reach out to our representatives. We have to make sure that we use our fraternity networks, that we see sorority networks being used, that we look at all of the institutions of the community. This is when the church matters, because what we're talking about is a moral issue. And I think this is a time when we have to challenge decent people who have not taken a stand about what is right or wrong. This is a time where we've got to reach across ethnic lines and make people understand that this is basic, it's fair, and it's important, and we need them here. I think that there has not been as critical a time since the 1960s. You think about the things that made African Americans come to the Democratic Party. First thing I remember was in 1962, Kennedy federalized the National Guard so that James Meredith could enter Ole Miss. And then in 63, when Wallace stood in the doors of University of Alabama, he federalized the National Guard again. And then LBJ, when the civil rights workers were killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi, sent the FBI down to see who really did it. For the first time, African Americans really believed that the leaders in Washington would use their power to do what's right. We've got to challenge those the children and the grandchildren of those leaders to say, if we ever needed you, we need you now. Now is the time. This is the issue. Voting is basic and necessary, and it is only through working together that we can begin to solve the problems of our community. Whether children are protected when they go to school, whether children have access to health care, whether women have the right to choose. All of these things are right here, right now. If you can't take a moral stand right now, then you are as bad as Magda is. You are helping their agenda if you're not standing up for what's right today.
We're gonna come back to voting. You gave me another segue. I like these segues here. So let's talk about a big one here. Let's talk about women's rights, and let us talk about SB 8, this new abortion restriction law, which prohibits abortions as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy. In lieu of government enforcement, a private individual can sue abortion providers or people who assist abortion after an ultrasound can detect what lawmakers define as a fetal heartbeat. So, I call this the snitch bill here, but I mean, because that's really what it is. That's really what it is. And I think it goes into the heart of Roe versus Wade, which I don't know whether many understand that the heart of Roe versus Wade is a woman's right to privacy. And it seems like this is a direct violation of that right to privacy. Would you brothers like to dive in and talk about this one?
Okay, who do you want first?
Go ahead, Brother Travillion.
All right. Let's see. Let me do one thing. Somebody's at the door. So, Brother McDaniel, if you start, I will let them in and then come back. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we need to admit about this one is that this is based in classic Jim Crow activities. That when we think of what the state did to a lot of the Jim Crow laws to go through is they said, no, it's not the state, it's private citizens. And so they're basically they're resurrecting Jim Crow right in front of us. Now, the thing about this is Roe v. Wade is critical because it spoke to privacy. And Roe v. Wade has been critical for advancing a lot of LGBTQ rights. So if we think of a lot of the cases that have come out in Texas, which have tried to ban certain sexual acts or try to ban other things, because of Roe v. Wade, they said, no, this is private. This is private consensual activities. And so what we see here is that a tearing down of Roe v. Wade is not just stopping abortion. Tearing down of Roe v. Wade is also stopping privacy. And for a bunch of people who claim to want liberty and not have government involved in their lives, well, now you are opening the door for government to be more involved in your lives by doing this. By getting rid of this, by striking down Roe v. Wade and the idea of privacy, you are opening up the door. You're opening up a whole new can of worms. And this is really how Jim Crow got started. If we look at how the Supreme Court interpreted the 14th Amendment, it began to interpret the 14th Amendment in a lot of ways that gave states a lot of power to control people's actions. So if we think of the slaughterhouse cases in Louisiana, that there are other cases where the Supreme Court gave the states a lot more power to regulate behavior. And so when Plessy v. Ferguson came along, hey, that was right there and made logical sense. So when we think about this, we cannot forget about the fact that this is linked to Jim Crow, that these things that we think are not linked to race have racial impacts. And the abortion thing in the abortion case is really about violating privacy. And it's now, if they do overturn Roe v. Wade, they will basically open up the door for the government to become much more involved in your day-to-day life, even though the people who claim to love liberty have no problem with the government invading your privacy.
So I think that there are a number of things that we have to look to, and we have to take the practical approach to them. The issue of choice is a very personal issue. You have to decide whether at this point in your life you are willing and able and have the resources to put someone else first. We all know who have children that once you have children, it's not about you anymore. It is about making sure that they have access. Well, now, the state of Texas has decreased the amount of spending in public education, has decreased the amount of spending in access to health care, has decreased the amount of spending in access to nutrition. And how can you argue that you are creating a culture of life when you take away all of the basic needs so that you can participate in this economy? It is ridiculous. And, when you talk about deciding for a person when they're ready, this is something that seems to me to be counterproductive as well. Also, when you look at the fact that people of means will have the opportunity to take their children anywhere else they want to. They can go to Canada, they can go to New York, they can go to California, anywhere they can afford to go. This only impacts poor people. And at the end of the day, what you have done is fueled poverty more than you fueled anything else. Unless you can make the argument that when you have a child, everything that you need for that child to be successful in this community is provided for you. They have taken all of the resources with one hand and guaranteed and violated one's right of privacy with another. It should be a woman's right to choose. Only she can decide when she is prepared to make the sacrifices that are necessary to be a parent. It speaks to a number of things that the Republican Party has done. They, for example, capped the cities and counties' ability to raise revenue through taxes. We used to be able to raise it up to 8% without having a rollback election. They have moved it to 3.5%. Now, some people might think that's good, but if you're a community like Austin and the Austin area that is growing at a double-digit rate for more than 10 years, that impacts your ability to provide basic services, basic road work, basic access to health, and all of these things. When you look at what the governor has done, he's taken all of the dollars that have come from Washington to help with our crisis here, our pandemic, and he has hoarded $16 billion. While he has asked us to spend our money to make sure that people are safe. And then when we try to make sure that children are safe by putting masks on them as they go to school, he has sued in order to show his the dominance that the Emergency Powers Act gives him, without the conscience that's necessary to understand that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. 97% of the people who find themselves in hospitals on ventilators and in ICU were not vaccinated.
To kind of go along with what Brother Trevillion's pointing out is, these people are not pro-life. They're pro-birth. And that needs to be made very clear, that they want to tell you when the baby's born. After that, you're on your own. So they are not pro-life, they are pro-birth. If they were pro-life, they would have stronger concerns about environmental protections. If they were pro-life, they would provide more services for poor women to make sure that they have medical care. If they were pro-life, they would do things such as regulating police actions and making sure that everybody was safe in their community. They are not pro-life. They are pro-birth. And this is all about controlling people's bodies. And this is nothing more than that. This is not about we want to make sure everybody gets an equal chance. No. Because if you want everybody to get an equal chance, you would have done a whole lot more work early on.
It's about power, not principle. If it were about principle, we would have expanded Medicaid and brought $10 to $15 billion a year of Texas taxpayers' dollars back home. We have the highest number of uninsured people in the country. And when the pandemic first came out and we were getting communities to test and send us the results, our system is so antiquated that they had to fax the materials in. Now, mind you, the Republican Party was responsible for the IT systems at Health and Human Services, and it is the Republican Party that stole money, and many of them should be in jail and would be if the primary judiciary were not Republican. They stole millions of dollars. Former Texas state representatives stole money rather than upgrading an IT system so that we can share data across the state, so that we can understand and share scientific studies, so that we can do all the things that are necessary to protect our children. And they should be ashamed of themselves for stealing and doing the things that don't keep our children safe.
You made a great point about pro-life not being about life at all, but really being about pro-birth, being anti-abortion, being basically anti a medical procedure, and not much compassion with life. You definitely see it when we're talking about the immigrant population. The lack of compassion, the lack of empathy. But let's stick with this pro-life piece for a bit. Let's talk about policing. Let's talk about Botham Jean and HB 929, which requires police officers to keep body cameras on during the entirety of active investigations.
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that the first thing that we have got to address is qualified immunity. Because you are a member of a federal task force should not mean that your actions are not evaluated to see whether you followed procedure and the law. We have had too many people die in the hands of officers who, because of qualified immunity, because they were a part of a DEA team or a Justice Department team, they were not even given the scrutiny of their actions were not given the scrutiny or they were not even required to defend their actions. It's going to be important that we have one set of rules and that we all live by them. At the end of the day, I grew up in a city that had African American officers and white officers too. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and 40% of our population is African American. I knew the officers that patrolled my neighborhood. I went to church with the officers that patrolled my neighborhood. I went to school with the children of guys who patrolled my neighborhood. When something was going on and I was out of line, they would say, "Hold up, you're out of line. This is what I need you to do. Get yourself straight before I have to take you into jail." This is what happens in the white community. They talk to kids. If they make a mistake, they correct them and don't punish them. What we have found is a lot of folks pick going into minority communities because they know nothing will be said if they abuse their power. it is important for us to make sure that we fund adequately the cameras that are necessary to make sure that we look at the entire situation. Meaning, the car should have a camera, and then as soon as you open the car door, your camera should come on. And if you turn it off, that should be cause for dismissal right there. That it is important for us to make sure that we set the foundation that is necessary to go back to community policing. At the end of the day, we ought to have PAL programs where police officers are coaches and referees and work in communities so that they meet a child at 5 years old rather than 15 years old. When you look in places like Atlanta, when you look in places like St. Louis, when you look in places like Los Angeles, you will find officers in schools working with kids to make sure that they develop a relationship. It is important to be able to meet and talk with kids without the pressure of a stop, without the pressure of an arrest. It is important that officers be a part of the community and that we make sure that the police force reflects the community itself.
You said a couple of things that really struck me, especially with growing up in the community where you grew up side by side with the children of the officers that work there. It seems as though if an officer lives in the community that he polices, he sees, and we take it a step further, I could say he sees the humanity in those he polices, but it's a step further from humanity. He sees the family in those he polices. And so as he's looking at these community members, he sees them as just that, a part of his community, a part of his family. And as opposed to flexing power, he's using influence to ensure that if a young man or young woman is making a mistake, he can influence them to get them back on the right track without penalizing them.
Exactly.
Brother McDaniel, you were about to say something. I apologize.
Oh, no. I agree fully because you pointed out the key thing is the dehumanization. The fact that these individuals are coming into Black and brown communities to control, not to police, not to protect and serve, but to control is a major problem. And if you look at the way in which they interact, if you think about the random stops that they take part in, that where they barely ever find anything. Now, they may find something in 1 in every 1,000 stops. They find something big, but the problem is you have 999 stops where you've alienated a member of the community. And these stops are not productive. They're really there as a form of control. So if I get pulled over for having a tree hanging from my window and that opens my rearview mirror, and that means I get to get searched, that's problematic. That they're using this as a way to control these communities. There's some great work coming from North Carolina, University of North Carolina Professor Frank Baumgartner, who's looked at this and seen that these stops they're race-based. They're more likely to happen in Black communities, and if you're a Black person in a white community, you're more likely to get pulled over. Having the camera on is reactive. The first thing you need to ask is, why are you even stopping this individual? That needs to be justified. Why are you even interacting with this individual? And then, okay, how did you interact with the individual? The fact that you're willing to stop these individuals and talk to them in the way you are is because you dehumanize them. And all you do is roll around in your vehicle, looking at them, looking for something to happen. And you're looking for an excuse to bash heads. You're not looking for an excuse to interact with people. And while the camera thing is nice, we need to ask the other question of, why did you stop them to even begin with?
Mm-hmm.
But if I can interject something here for a second. Mm-hmm. The president of the Texas Peace Officers Association, which is the African American group of officers in Austin, is a frat brother. And he is a member at Ebenezer Church, and he is a coach in the community, and he played football at Reagan High. He was, it is somebody that people can see, touch, understand. We have a tradition. African Americans oftentimes found themselves in the police department, not because they loved policing, but they had a negative experience and they wanted to make sure that no others had that same type of experience. We had a Medal of Honor winner here, and what he did was he risked his life to go in and stop a person who had shot a rival in a love triangle. He risked his life because he knew the person's family, and he said, look, he went in and he said, look, you need to let her, the young woman went in the house, shot the other woman. He said, you need to let her get assistance, because if you don't and she dies, this will be something completely different. He didn't use his gun. He talked to her as a human being. He told her, look, if you don't surrender, who's going to raise your children? Now, you're going to be in trouble, but if she dies, you're going away forever. I'm talking about somebody who can talk to a community, who understands what people see, and walked her out, guaranteed her that she would not be shot, walked her out of that building. And he said he was an officer for 30 years, never had to pull his gun. Most respected officer on the force, because he knew how to talk to people, and he could make you understand that if you were out of line, we were going to have to do the things that we needed to do to fix it, but you wouldn't be killed in the process. Sandra Bland lost her life because she wouldn't put her cigarette out. The guy said, put your cigarette out. And she said, I should be able to smoke my cigarette in my own car. And everything went downhill from there.
Yeah, it's a power thing, and if you listen to the way in which the police try to defend this, it's like, you do what we say. And what do you mean we do what you say? It's a power thing. And one of the things that we forget is there was a country singer, a black country singer, who put out a video about how to deal with police. And he said, the reason I put this out is because my father, who is white, so his mother's black, his father, who's white, is a state trooper. He said, they will kill you. Now, everybody's praising him for putting out this video, but they seem to forget the reason why he put out the video is because his white father knew they will kill you, that he was scared for his black son because he knew about his colleagues. That right there tells you there's something majorly wrong. And this whole idea of going back to Dirty Harry, shoot first, ask questions later, it ain't working. It never did work before. Now, it makes you feel like you can stick your chest out, makes you feel like you're a big man, but it doesn't work. It actually alienates communities. It engenders anger and frustration, and you end up with a lot of people, innocent people, being killed because your ego got hurt.
When policing does not problem solve, it is not policing.
That is true. That is very true. Brothers, this has been a great conversation. Thank you, Brother McDaniel. Thank you, Commissioner Travillion, for joining us today. We are about to run out of time. I'm going to turn this back over to Brother Harrington so that he can close us out.
Well, I would like to thank all of you all for participating. What a powerful conversation. And at the end of the day, if you want to see where our community is going, you got to stay involved in these conversations. I admit that I'm still not aware of everything that has transpired through this last legislative session. The laws that have been going forth, I think Brother Enobakhare said 666 laws. Are you serious, man?
We need a part two. We need a part two.
We do need a part two. This was an outstanding dialogue, and we're ecstatic to have you all part of this conversation. Brother Travillion, Brother Enobakhare, Brother McDaniel, we thank you so much. Your knowledge is going to help so many people, because at the end of the day, I think the complexity in itself is what the opposition wants us to have. and you all making it plain for us has made such a great, great step in the right direction for us. Thank you so much. I want to thank our back end guy, Richard North, brother Richard North. We thank you so much for making us look so good in this live stream. Everybody knows that today Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp were all down, but we thank you all for still sticking it out with us and joining today. Well, we're going to end this right now. Thank you so much. Look for more of these alpha streams coming forth, and we'll make sure that Gamma, Eta, Lambda like the page. By the way, you don't have to be an alpha to like our page because this is where we post. Like the page, Gamma, Eta, Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Like that page because this is where we're going to be posting some things. Once the stream is also edited, we'll post it to our YouTube page as well. Thank you so much and have a good night.